There's a condenser sitting in my neighbor Pete's side yard, caked solid with a summer of dirt. Pete was staring down a tech bill pushing $300, and the whole problem was sitting right there on the outside of the unit, not buried inside it somewhere. My name's Gary, and I've spent 40-some years working every trade there is, mechanic to roofer to general contractor, cleaning coils exactly like as more times than I can count. That job cost him about $20 in supplies, and an hour of his Saturday, same result as the guy with the truck and the invoice pad. I'll walk you through exactly what I did, what to buy, and the one mistake that turns this easy fix into an expensive one. Pete's coil didn't get that bad by accident, and neither will yours if you never take a look at it. Every air conditioner runs on 2 coils doing the actual work, one outside in the condenser unit and one inside, usually sitting right above your furnace. The outside coil dumps the heat your house doesn't want, and the inside coil pulls that same heat out of your air before the blower pushes it back through your vents. Think of it the same way your body sweats to cool off. Sweat only works if the air can actually reach your skin and carry that heat away with it, and a coil runs on the same basic idea, except instead of sweat, it's got thin aluminum fins packed in tight to grab as much air as possible. Here's the problem, though. Those fins are built to move air, not to catch it. But that's exactly what happens once dirt, grass clippings, and plain old dust start building up on the surface. A little grime doesn't sound like much, but it acts like a blanket thrown right over the coil, and that blanket gets thicker with every season you skip cleaning it. Once that layer builds up, air can't move through the fins the way it's supposed to, and the coil can't move heat the way it's supposed to either. So your fan has to spin longer, your compressor has to run harder, and your whole system starts working overtime just to hit the same temperature it used to hit, without breaking a sweat. I've looked at the numbers on this, and they're not small. A layer of dirt about as thin as a dime sitting on a coil can knock efficiency down by something like 20%. And government energy data has shown neglected systems losing up to 30% more power just from that one problem. Now, I'll be straight with you, that's the rough end of it. Plenty of systems only lose a few percent to normal buildup, and how bad yours is depends entirely on how long it's been since anybody looked at it. But even on the low end, that's real money leaving your pocket every month for a problem you can fix yourself in about an hour. Pete's unit had gone untouched long enough that you could see the buildup from 10 feet away, a gray-brown coating packed into every gap between the fins. That's not rare. Most homeowners never look twice at that side of the house once the unit's installed, and the coil just keeps collecting whatever the yard and the wind hand it, year after year, until the system's working double time just to keep up. I've been doing this kind of work for 40-some years now, and coil cleaning is nowhere near the hardest thing I've touched. I started out as a mechanic, then picked up roofing, then general contracting, not because I planned any of it that way, but because in my line of work, you took whatever job paid, and you learned it cold. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I spent a few years standing on job sites right next to guys like Denny, watching him quote homeowners for work I already knew the real material cost of. So when I tell you a professional coil cleaning runs somewhere between $75 and $400, depending on which coil it is and how the company prices it, with the average landing around $250, I've stood there and watched guys like Denny write it on the invoice pad. I'll get into what's behind that number later on, but that's not the job Pete actually needed. Pete needed his coil cleaned, plain and simple, and that part of the job, the actual dirty work, runs about $20 in supplies if you do it yourself. Half the guys I grew up with in this neighborhood have been calling me instead of a company like Denny's for 30 years now, and it's never once been because the work was too hard to explain. My sister Linda texts me a photo whenever something looks off at her place asking what she should buy, and coil cleaning is one of the easiest things I've ever walked her through. I've had my own son Wyatt out here with me on plenty of these lately, learning it the same way I did. If a job like this is simple enough to hand to somebody who's never touched a condenser unit before, it's simple enough for you standing in your own side yard with a hose in your hand. So let's get into exactly what I used on Pete's unit, what it cost, and the steps I walked through to get it clean. Here's what actually goes into a job like this, and it's a shorter list than you'd think. You need a can of foaming coil cleaner, and you can grab one at pretty much any hardware store for right around $10, sometimes closer to $9 and change depending on the brand. A stiff, soft bristle brush comes next, the kind built for cleaning, not a wire brush that'll chew up the fins. Round it out with a garden hose you already own, a shop vac if you've got one, and a screwdriver to pull a few panels. Add it up and you're looking at maybe $15 to $20 out of pocket. And that's if you don't already have half of it sitting in your garage, which most of you probably do. None of this is specialty gear. You're not renting anything, you're not ordering a part, and you're not waiting 3 days for something to ship. Everything on that list sits on a shelf at the hardware store down the road from you, and most of it doubles as stuff you'd use on a dozen other jobs around the house anyway. First thing you do, every single time before you touch a single screw, is kill the power. Most outdoor units have a gray disconnect box mounted on the wall right next to them. So pull that plug, or flip that block, and if your unit doesn't have one, go kill it at the breaker panel inside the house instead. This isn't a step you skip because you're in a hurry. There's a fan in there that can start spinning the second the power comes back live, and you don't want your hand anywhere near it when that happens. Once the power's off, pull the top cap off the unit, which usually just takes removing a handful of screws around the rim, and set the fan assembly somewhere it won't get stepped on. Take the side panels off too, and now you can get at the coil from the top and from the side both. Before you spray anything, grab that shop vac and pull out whatever's built up in the bottom of the cabinet. Leaves, mulch, seed pods, whatever the wind's been feeding it all year, because that stuff turns straight into mud the second you introduce water and cleaner to it. Take a flashlight and shine it straight through the fins from one side while you look from the other. If you can barely see the light coming through, that coil's about as bad as Pete's was, packed tight enough that hardly any air was making it through in the first place. That little check tells you exactly how much work you're in for before you spray a single drop of cleaner. Now here's the part that actually matters, and it's the one thing that turns an easy $20 fix into an expensive mistake if you get it wrong. Whatever you do, don't reach for a power washer. I don't care how tempting it looks sitting in your garage. Those fins are thin aluminum made for moving air, not for taking a direct hit from a few thousand pounds of water pressure, and a power washer will fold them flat or punch straight through the coil tubing in about 2 seconds flat. Bend the fins bad enough and you've choked off your airflow all over again. Punch a hole in that tubing and you've opened up a refrigerant leak. Now you're not looking at a $20 cleaning job anymore. You're looking at a coil replacement that can run anywhere from $900 to over $2,000. And that's before anybody even talks about what it does to your warranty. So here's what you use instead. Spray your foaming coil cleaner on according to the label, which usually means mixing it down with water first, about 1 part cleaner to 3 parts water if you're working from a concentrate. Coat the coil good, and let it sit for 5 to 15 minutes. That foam's whole job is to work its way down between those fins and grab hold of everything that's built up in there, and you'll watch it turn from white foam to a dirty brown mess as it does its work. While that's soaking, take your brush and clean off anything caked onto the outside, brushing only in the direction the fins run, never side to side and never straight into them, because pushing against the grain is just as good a way to fold them over as any power washer. Once that cleaner's had its time to work, rinse the whole thing down with your garden hose on a gentle fan or shower setting. Nothing cranked up and nothing with your thumb over the end trying to turn it into a jet. Start at the top and work your way down, rinsing until the water running off comes back clear instead of that dirty brown it starts out as. Take that same flashlight and check through the fins again once it's rinsed, and add a few minutes to drip dry. You should be able to see clean through to the other side now, and that's how you know the job's actually done instead of just looking better on the surface. Put the panels and the fan assembly back on, making sure you're using the same screws you took out and not anything longer that could poke through and hit the coil, and that's the job done. Give the unit a few minutes before you flip the power back on, mostly just to let any water sitting around the electrical connections have a chance to drip off and dry. Now, if you're standing there without a can of coil cleaner and you don't feel like making a run to the store, there's an old trick that gets you most of the way there. Mix a little dish soap and some white vinegar into a bucket of warm water and use it the same way you'd use the foaming cleaner. It won't foam up and work its way into the fins quite as well, and it won't touch heavy. Years-old buildup the way a real coil cleaner will, but for a coil that just needs a light once-over, it'll do the job with stuff you probably already got under your sink. I'll be honest, though, if the coil looks anything like Pete's did, spend the $10 on the real thing. Something this simple moves the needle on your power bill because of that blanket of dirt idea from earlier. The whole reason a coil works is that refrigerant on one side of that thin metal and air on the other side can get close enough to trade heat back and forth. and that only happens efficiently when there's nothing sitting in between them. The second you add a layer of grime, even a layer as thin as a dime, you've built a barrier between the metal and the air, and heat has to fight through that barrier instead of moving freely across it. I think about it the same way I think about a radiator caked in road grime. The metal underneath hasn't changed at all. It's still just as capable of moving heat as the day it was built. What's changed is everything sitting on top of it, blocking the transfer, forcing the whole system to run longer to push the same amount of heat through a smaller opening. Clean the surface off and you haven't upgraded anything, you've just given the part back the job it was already built to do. That's exactly where those efficiency numbers I mentioned come from. Engineers who study this for a living have measured a dime's worth of dirt costing a coil something like 20% of its efficiency, with that same government energy data pegging fouled coils at up to 30% higher compressor energy use in the worst cases. Other researchers looking at real homes running under normal everyday conditions found the hit usually runs smaller than that, often under 5% for a coil that isn't too far gone. So the honest answer is that it depends on how dirty yours already is. A unit that hasn't been touched in years is going to see a bigger jump from cleaning than one you keep up with every season. The power bill isn't the only place this shows up. When that fan and compressor have to work harder to push air through a clogged coil, they're running longer and hotter than they were built to. And that's exactly the kind of strain that burns out a motor or wears down a compressor years before it should. Higher static pressure across a blocked coil means the blower's fighting resistance it was never designed to fight. And a compressor running against restricted airflow builds up more heat and pressure inside itself than it would on a clean system. None of that shows up on your power bill directly. It shows up a few years down the road as a repair call that didn't have to happen. One HVAC company actually tracked a real cleaning job and measured a 21% jump in efficiency, along with a drop of better than 10% in the power the unit was pulling, just from doing what we walked through a minute ago. That's one documented case, not a guarantee for every unit out there, but it tells you the mechanism behind this is real, and it isn't some theory dreamed up to sell more cans of cleaner. So when you clean that coil, you're chasing more than a lower number on your electric bill. You're taking load off a compressor and a fan motor that are already working as hard as they were ever built to work, and giving both of them room to run the way they were designed to, instead of straining against a blanket of dirt every time the system kicks on. Now that outside condenser coil is only half the system. There's a second coil sitting inside your house, usually right above the furnace or tucked into the air handler, called the evaporator coil. And it gets dirty for a completely different set of reasons. Out back, it's leaves and grass clippings and whatever the yard happens to throw at it. Inside, it's dust that slips past a dirty filter, combined with the fact that the coil is constantly wet from condensation while it's running, which is about as good a setup for a film of grime, and even mold, as you could design on purpose. I'll tell you straight, that one's a harder job to get at, and it's not the same afternoon project as the condenser. It usually sits behind sealed panels with foil tape holding things shut, and right next to it are the copper lines carrying refrigerant into your house. Getting to it means working around those lines carefully. And if you ever hear a hissing sound while you're back there, that's your sign to stop completely and call somebody licensed, because that's a refrigerant leak, not a cleaning problem. And it's not something you fix with a brush and a hose. Even the screws matter more back there than they do outside. Get a screw that's even a little too long going back into that panel and you can drive it straight through the coil behind it. And now you've caused the exact leak you were trying to avoid. It's not that the job can't be done by a careful homeowner, it's that the margin for error is thinner, and the parts sitting right next to it are a lot less forgiving than a fan blade in your side yard. For most of you, keeping that indoor coil in decent shape comes down to something a lot simpler than cleaning it yourself. And that's just changing your filter on schedule, so the dust never gets back there to build up in the first place. On the outside unit, the habit that keeps you from ever facing what Pete was facing is just keeping 2 to 3 feet of clear space around it. Trim the bushes back, rake the grass clippings away from the base, and don't let leaves pile up against the cabinet every fall. Do that, and clean the condenser coil once or twice a year, and you're looking at a quick maintenance job every time instead of the deep clean Pete needed. Now, I've worked every trade there is for 40-some years, and part of what that teaches you is knowing exactly where the easy job ends and the expensive mistake begins, cleaning your own evaporator coil. The one buried behind the panels near your refrigerant lines is past that line for most homeowners, And so is anything where you've actually got a hissing line, standing water in the pan, or a coil that needs to come all the way out to get cleaned properly. Those aren't jobs where a mistake costs you a redo. They're jobs where a mistake costs you a licensed repair stacked right on top of whatever you already spent trying to save money in the first place. And I'll say this part again because it's worth repeating twice. Never reach for a power washer on any coil, inside or out, no matter how careful you think you're being. Those fins are soft enough that even a low setting on a consumer power washer can fold them flat or punch straight through the tubing, and once that happens, you're not talking about a $20 Saturday anymore. You're talking about a coil replacement that can run anywhere from $900 to over $2,000, plus a manufacturer's warranty that a power washer can void outright, no questions asked. I'm not telling you any of this to scare you off the job, because the condenser coil clean we just walked through is about as safe a repair as you'll find anywhere in this house. I'm telling you because being honest about where the real risk actually sits is what lets you do the rest of it with confidence. My son Wyatt balked at his first real repair, standing there not sure if a job he'd never done before was going to turn into something bigger than he could handle. Turned out the actual list of ways to make things worse was a lot shorter than he thought. And once he knew where those few real lines sat, the rest of the job stopped being scary and just became work. That's the whole point of laying it out plain like this. So once you know how simple that job actually is, it's worth asking why a tech visit for that same coil runs you $200 or $300. I worked next to guys like Denny for years, close enough to watch him quote jobs I already knew the real cost of. And I can tell you straight, it's not because anybody's running a scam. Denny's not a crook. He's got a truck, insurance, a crew, and a business to run, and every bit of that gets priced into the visit, whether the actual cleaning takes him 20 minutes or 2 hours of his afternoon. What you're really paying for when you call somebody out is never having to think about the job again. Somebody else shows up. Somebody else touches the dirty parts. Somebody else carries the liability if anything goes sideways, and that convenience has a real price tag attached to it. A condenser coil cleaning alone typically runs $75 to $230 through a licensed company, and that's before you even get into the jobs that need a full coil removal or an acid wash. Work that actually calls for a truck and a license, not a garden hose and a Saturday afternoon. Think about what actually gets billed on a service call like that. There's the drive out to your house, the diagnostic time before anybody touches the unit, the insurance sitting behind every truck on the road, and the crew standing there whether the coil takes 20 minutes or an hour to clean. None of that's a scam. It's just a completely different cost structure than a guy in his own driveway with a can of cleaner he already paid $10 for. That doesn't mean you should never call a guy like Denny. Some jobs on this list, the evaporator coil, anything with an actual refrigerant leak, those are exactly where his truck and his license earn their keep. But the condenser coil sitting in your side yard right now, caked up the same way Pete's was, isn't one of them. That gap between $75 and $20 isn't markup for the sake of markup. It's the cost of convenience you don't need for a job this small, when somebody's actually shown you how to do it yourself. That's the whole thing. The $20 Saturday and the $300 tech visit end at the same clean coil. Pete's system runs like new now for an hour of his time and a trip to the hardware store. So go take a look at your own unit this weekend, and if it looks anything like his did, you already know what to do. After that, it's just filters, clearance, and the drain.